And welcome back to the Power Accountability League. I am your pal, Dan L. This is my channel. And when are you and your friends and family going to get tired of living in this hell? Today's video is entitled Something Victor Davis Hanson Said. And before we go any further, again, you're wondering, is this a Band-Aid? Did I get punched in the nose? It's actually a Breathe Right strip. I have chronic sinusitis, so it helps me breathe. And by the way, I'm not being sponsored by Breathe Right. I don't have a beef with Breathe Right. If they wanted to sponsor me, I'd be more than happy to accept that. But I just wanted to let you know what this is all about. So let's get back to it. Like Jen Psaki, let's circle back. Um, and something Victor Davis Hanson said. What has he said that has caught my attention? Well, he said it hundreds of times. He said it in many, many videos. He said it in many interviews. He's used the phrase the hollowing out of the interior of the country. Now, there's the coastal regions of the country, and then, of course, there's the interior. And you could call it, so, you might think of it as the Midwest or the Midlands. In basically any area that's not a coastal region, we'll just call that the interior of the country. And I witnessed that hollowing out firsthand. Victor Davis Hanson is correct. Over the last several decades, we have hollowed out the interior of the USA. And again, you might be thinking, well, I need a metaphor. So I guess you take a cantaloupe and you take a melon baller and you hollow out the cantaloupe. You take the pulp or whatever I don't know what it's called, whatever that stuff is, and you carve out the interior of the cantaloupe, and then now you have an empty cantaloupe. And the USA has done that over the last several decades to the interior of the country. And I'm going to give you some specifics. I'm going to tell you some of my anecdotal observations, but he's definitely correct. I mean, the government statistics bear it out, but like I said, I saw it firsthand. Now, in the late 1990s, I moved away from the interior of the country. I moved to the coastal region. Now, and like when I lived in the interior, I lived in multiple cities in the interior of the United States. And since I moved away in the late 1990s from the interior to the coastal region, I've lived in multiple coastal regions. Anyway, so I've seen a lot of the USA. Anyway, but let's talk about my time in the interior. And I grew up in the interior. I was born in the interior of the United States. I was born in the Midwest, raised, went to college, graduated. And I was born long before 1973. So I saw what America was before 1973, and of course, we've all seen what America has become after 1973. And I made a video called "The Most Important Year in American History." And again, that year, the defining year in American history is 1973. And you'll have to watch the video to find out. I talk about a confluence of events that changed the course of the USA. For the first 200 years of the USA, things progressively got better. Each generation bequeathed a better future to their children. The first 200 years, the standard of living was increasing. Obviously, technology was increasing. If you lost your job, there was usually another job to go to. Quite often, you might lose one. You might either quit or be fired from one job, and you get a better job somewhere else. That was something that happened quite often. Now, obviously, the reverse of that can happen too. You lose a good job and you take a job where you're not making as much money. So, but anyway, but for the first 20 years, generally speaking, on the macro scale, people's lives were getting better for 200 years, and that made people happy because they looked at their children. They said, the lives of my children will be better than mine, and that's what parents were trying to do for 200 years, make sure that their children had a better life than they had. And people worked hard, and they saved. They were frugal. People had a lot of common sense. Well, they had enough common sense to know that you can't get something for nothing, that you have to work hard in life, and you employ some common sense, some street sense. And if you can get an education, you go and you get yourself educated, and then you play by the rules. And if you do all those things, educate yourself, work hard, play by the rules, your life's going to get better, and you're going to have a nice standard of living. Again, that was the important part. For 200 years, standard of living kept getting better with each generation. That meant more leisure time. It meant more money. It meant less stressing out over finances. If you were paying rent somewhere, you can pay rent, and you can rent a home or a townhouse or an apartment. You can rent, or you can own. But either way, each month you have to have some money for either the mortgage company, the bank, or some money for the landlord. And for the first and it's no fun to think, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my rent or my mortgage. Obviously people go through these challenges in life. Most people do. Usually you do a lot of stressing out when you're young. But unfortunately, what happened after 1973 was we started getting the interior of the USA changed because family farms started going away. Now that the food you eat, it doesn't come from a family. It used to for over 200 years. With that food you put on your table, that came from a family farm somewhere. If there was a family, let's just say a husband and wife with children on their family, raising it could be just be crops, but quite often crops and other things like cows, pigs, stuff like that. So they were raising crops and livestock, and then you had inexpensive food. It was plentiful. Food was inexpensive and plentiful for 200. Well, for it kept getting more plentiful and expensive for 200 years. By 1976, food was everywhere. The reason America became super fat is because food was cheap and it was everywhere. You can't drive 50 feet without seeing a McDonald's, a KFC, a Wendy's, whatever. Or if you don't see those, you're seeing a nice, expensive restaurant, or you're seeing, Red Lobster or whatever. But the point is, food is everywhere, and people can afford it. It was much easier to afford once upon a time. But the main part was that the main thrust of this conversation is the family farm went away. Almost everything you eat now comes from corporate farming. Corporate farming is crap, is horrible compared to family farms. America is better with family farms, and we've gotten rid of the family farm in the USA. It's now pretty much corporate farming. And the reason I say corporate farming is terrible compared to family farms is because corporations have a lowest common denominator theory on everything. Corporations, they talk a lot about quality, but really all they care about is quantity. Corporations, they give a good speech about quality, but they don't. That's not important to them. It's why quantity? Because money. You sell more widgets, you get more money. It's that simple. You have more chickens and you sell more chickens, you have more money. Who cares if you shoot the chickens up with all sorts of hormones and whatever, and you keep the chickens locked inside of a warehouse. They never see the sun. A chicken is born inside of a sunless warehouse and it grows, and all you're doing, they do the same thing with cows and all the other livestock. And you're thinking, well, this is great, using this modern veterinary medicine for animals. No, it's not great. It's not great. I know it sounds great. It's like getting something for nothing. You inject some sort of chemical into livestock, and you get it, and it grows faster and bigger, and you're like, hey, look at that. But trust me, there's a price to pay when you've fundamentally changed the DNA of the food you're eating. So, but even if you don't agree with that, and that's fine, you can do your own research on and come up with your own conclusion. But family farms are better than corporate farms also because why? There's more honest competition, and and family farmers care about the land more than corporations do, and they care about the future. That's the key here. Family farmers care about the future more than corporations do. Corporations have to make a profit in the next quarter. Corporations, they're American not this isn't true of Japan or Germany, but American corporations, they only care about the next quarter's profits. They're only looking literally 3 or 4 months down the road. That's the extent of their forward vision. Family farmers have to look years down the road. So they have to make decisions based on that. Now, they have to make decisions that plan for the future. Corporations, they talk. All they do is virtue signal about how they plan for the future. They don't. Corporations are about immediate gratification. Family farmers are smart enough, have enough wisdom to know it can't just be about immediate gratification. But in addition to getting rid of the family farm, we also got rid of manufacturing. The United States the way the poor people got into the middle class and the way lower middle class people got into the upper middle class was manufacturing, factory jobs. Now, I went on a website called DetroitYes.com and I saw some data that I thought was interesting. In 1982, the average worker at Ford, GM, and Chrysler was making $11.62 an hour. Now, you might be saying, well, wait a minute, I make $11.62 and it's 40 years later. Well, I sympathize, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I graduated from college, and by the by the early 1990s, I was looking for a job. I'd gone through several jobs at this point. I was looking for a job as a factory worker at Firestone. Now, the suppliers to GM, Ford, and Chrysler, companies like Firestone and Goodyear, they paid their factory workers just a little bit less than the auto companies did, and their benefits probably a little bit less, but still good pay and good benefits back in 1982. Remember, we're focusing on 1982 right now. And that 1162 wage for GM, Ford, and Chrysler employees, they also got great benefits. They, pensions, retirement, all that kind of stuff, and obviously good insurance coverage. So 1162 an hour, which is a living wage, and good benefits, good insurance, retirement benefits, etc. Um, and when I applied to work at Firestone in the early 1990s, it was more than a decade after 1982. They were offering $8 an hour, terrible benefits, and the interview process was really interesting. I mean, it was complex. It wasn't just here, we interview you and then we call you up and tell you whether you've been hired. You had to go through a long process, and I was surprised. It's kind of like auditioning at Hollywood. You had to come back for a callback, and that there was we put us in a room with some sort of team building exercise. It was complex. It was the most complex job interview process I've ever gone through, and it was for a factory job at $8 an hour with lousy benefits. Well, that's an anecdotal story, but it is indicative of the problems over the last 50 years, meaning the declining standard of living of people. And again, wages, we know for certain 1162 an hour in 1982. Wages have been frozen. Wages have not gone up in 40 years, at least 40 years. Wages have not gone up. And you're thinking, well, what about inflation? Well, when you adjust for inflation, wages have gone down for 40 years. You'll hear Republicans and conservatives say wages have been stagnant for 40 years. No, they've gone backwards. Wages have gone backwards for 40 years. And that's again because we hollowed out the interior of the country. And I lived in many different cities in the interior of the country. And by the late 1990s, I moved to the coastal region. And now I've lived in several different cities along multiple coastal regions of the USA. So I've seen both. I've seen the interior of the country and I've seen the coastal regions. Now, during the period when we were hollowing out the interior, the coastal regions were doing better and better, mainly because of real estate. Go on Zillow and take a look at the price of a house in Southern California in 1975, and take a look at if you bought a house for 50,000 in 1975 in Southern California, you could buy a nice house in 1975 for 50,000 in Southern California. That house today is worth well over $2 million. Well, probably, well over. So you're on paper you're a millionaire if you bought a house in Southern California, 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s. Heck, I know friends and family who've bought houses in coastal region in the 1990s, and their house has gone up fivefold. And the house when they bought the house in the 1990s, it had already gone up five or sixfold, it increased five or sixfold from the previous owner. So what has kept the coastal regions doing really well is real estate. It's gone through the roof. Um, but the point is, what did I notice? When I saw this hollowing out of the Midwest. Well, I remember a time when people were pretty pleasant. People were now, kind of a Mayberry RFD type of thing, kind of Andy Griffith and Mayberry. People were generally pleasant to each other, and I watched that change over the last several decades. People in the interior of the country became vengeful, bitter, resentful, angry, violent sometimes, self-destructive most of the time, and the character of the USA changed. Now that's happening to the coastal region because we've the entire first we hollowed out the interior of the country, and Ross Perot said there'd be a giant sucking sound. Well, that sucking sound we're sucking down the coastal regions now. So then now the entire country is angry, bitter. People can't get along with each other. Just in general, a mean spiritedness, a cruelty has infected the American character. It wasn't there before. I knew an America that wasn't sadistic and cruel, but it has become that. And it's because our leaders have failed. Our leaders have been bad. We've had short-term thinking. So that's the story of Victor Davis Hanson. He was right. We've turned this into a cruel country, and we did it to ourselves. And it's because we chose bad leaders, and we didn't demand more from the leadership in the private and public sector. Anyway, take care. Bye-bye.